The program that you are about to hear is a production of the Anti-Fascist Unity Coalition in observance of the 161st anniversary of the raid on Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which began on October 16th, 1859. There are no professional actors on this recording, and no one is doing this for compensation. We all just came together to pay tribute to those who fought and died over the 3 days of the raid, a raid that will ultimately lead to a war that will end the evil institution of slavery John Brown fought against. We had other plans for this day, which included a vigil at Harper's Ferry itself, but due to the pandemic restrictions, we felt that this was the best alternative for us. We also want to recognize that May 9th would have been John Brown's 220th birthday, and October 2nd would have also been the 220th birthday of another that is remembered in this production, Nat Turner. Turner and Brown were not the only ones who rose up against this evil institution, and we will remember and pay tribute to others as well. So let us sit back and listen to the story of those warriors for freedom and justice, some forgotten, some remembered, all exalted.
Tonight we gather to pay our respects to a great anti-fascist fighter. We honor John Brown on the 161st anniversary of the raid he led on the U.S. Army at Harper's Ferry in what is today West Virginia. Some historians now argue that the raid John Brown led was the first battle in the U.S. Civil War, a war that would divide the nation around the defeat of a particularly U.S. fascist institution, slavery.
At the time of Brown's raid, the nation is divided, but people still think maybe we can compromise and prevaricate and somehow put off this reckoning over the division in our country and division over slavery. Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Tony Horowitz writes in his book, Midnight Rising, John Brown and the Raid That Sparked the Civil War.
John Brown's raid made it clear there would be no compromise.
In an interview with NPR, Horowitz said, Brown really touches off many of the hot buttons in our history and culture: violence, race, religious fundamentalism, and the right of the individual to defy their government.
If these hot button issues sound familiar, they should. Just check your Twitter feed or listen to a newscast. John Brown's story is as relevant today as it was in 1859. Perhaps more relevant in this moment than it has been since the anti-fascists defeated the Confederacy in the U.S. Civil War.
Tonight we will meet John Brown. We will spend time with those warriors, both black and white, who fought with him at Harper's Ferry. We will meet those who supported him and financed his efforts.
But before we do, we must acknowledge that John Brown's anti-fascist fight, like all fights for justice, is but one drop in a raging river that flows through human history. This river reaches back to the first time one person tried to subjugate another because of skin color, gender, place of birth, religion, or the myriad of other boxes fascists have created to try and classify a human being as anything more than a beautiful, wondrous individual like none who came before them and none who will come after. This river flows towards us in this hour and this day and this very second. It calls out to us to come into the water and be part of the rising tide of the people calling out for justice. John Brown's fight came at a branch of the river where the U.S. was horrifically birthed in genocide, kidnapping, brutality, rape, and slavery. John Brown's fight came at that branch of the river where abolitionists, both those who were enslaved and the free people who fought with them, raged for hundreds of years to bring down the peculiar and fascist institution of slavery. Before we meet John Brown tonight, let's travel back down the headwaters of this branch of the river and take a look at the stream into which John Brown's story flows.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Come on and wade in the water, you gotta wade. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, now you see those children all dressed up in white. God's gonna trouble the water. You know they must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, now you wanna wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade on in the water. I'm telling you, God's gonna trouble the water.
Travel with us now to the colony of South Carolina, just north of the Stono River. It is early fall in 1739. The largest rebellion of enslaved people in the history of the British mainland colonies is about to take place. 25 colonists would be dead when it was over, and between 35 and 50 kidnapped and enslaved Africans would be killed. The leader of this uprising is a literate enslaved person, sometimes called Jimmy and other times called Cato. Cato will lead 20 other enslaved people, all of them likely from the Central African Kingdom of Congo, and also likely former soldiers, on an armed march south from the Stono River. They are bound for Spanish Florida, where the Spanish have promised freedom and land to people enslaved by the British. Cato and his men recruited 60 other enslaved people to join their ranks and killed some white people who tried to stop their march before being intercepted by the South Militia near the Edisto River. Cato and some of his men escaped and made it 30 miles further before doing battle with the militia again. After this battle, most of the enslaved men were executed and a few others were sold to slave markets in the West Indies. Let us hear now the voice of George Cato from the 1930s, when he, as a 50-year-old man, recounted the stories that had been passed down through his family for more than 200 years about his anti-fascist warrior great-great-grandfather.
Yes, sir. I sure do come from that old stock who had the misfortune to be slaves, but who decided to be men at one and the same time, and I'm right proud of it. The first Cato slave we know about was plumb willing to lay down his life for that right as he sees it. That's powerful fine for the Catos who came after him. My granddaddy and my daddy tell me plenty about it, while we was living in Orangeburg County, not far from where the fighting took place in the long ago. My granddaddy was the son of the Stono slave commander. He said his daddy often took him over the route of the rebel slave march. As it comes down to me, I think the first Cato took a daring chance on losing his life, not so much for his own benefit as it was to help others. He was not like some slaves, much abused by their masters. My kinsfolk was not abused, was taught how to read and write by his rich masters. How did it all start? That's what I asked, but nobody ever told me how 100 slaves between the Combahee and the Edisto River came to meet in the woods not far from the Stono River on September 9, 1739, and how they elected a leader, my kinsman Cato, and late that day marched to Stono town, break in a warehouse, kill 2 white men in charge, and take all the guns and ammunition they want. But they did it. With this start, they turned south and march on. They worked fast, covering 15 miles, passing many fine plantations, and in every single case, stop and break in the house and kill the men, women, and children. Then they take what they want, including arms, clothes, liquor, and food. Near the Combahee Swamp, Lieutenant Governor Bull, driving from Beaufort to Charleston, sees them and he smells a rat. Before he was seen by the rebel army, he detours into the big woods and stays until the slave rebels pass. Governor Bull and some planters between the Combahee and the Desto rivers ride fast and spread the alarm, and it wasn't long until the militiamen were on the trail in pursuit of the slave army. When found, many of the slaves was singing and dancing, and Captain Cato and some of the other leaders was cussing at them somewhat awful. From that day to this, no Cato has tasted whiskey, lest he goes against his daddy's warning. This war lasted less than 2 days, but it sure was powerfully hot while it lasted. I reckon it was hot because in less than 2 days, 21 white men, women, and children, and 44 Negroes were slain. My granddaddy said that in the woods and at Stono, where the war started, there were more than 100 Negroes in line. When the militia came in sight of them at Combahee Swamp, the drinking, dancing Negroes scattered in the brush, and only 44 stood their ground. Commander Cato spoke for the crowd. He said, "We don't like slavery. We are started to join the Spanish in Florida. We surrender, but we are not whooped yet, and we are not converted." The other 43 men said, "Amen." They were taken unarmed and hanged by the militia. Long before this uprising, the Cato slave wrote passes for slaves and did all he could to send them to freedom. He died, but he died for doing right, as he said.
I'm on my boat on the old stone. Know that river, take you anywhere that you wanna go. Sail on the Ashley or the Yellowstone, but don't get caught in the mud when the tide gets low. There's so much river where I live down south. The ocean falls out of the river's mouth, and the fish don't care if it's fresh or brine when they find in the cast iron's good and mine. I'm on my boat on the old stone. Know that river, take you anywhere that you wanna go. Sail on the Ashley or the Yellowstone, but don't get caught in the mud when the tide gets low.
Travel with us now to the James River, water that flows into Norfolk, Virginia. It is 1800. Freedom is in the water. This is the year John Brown and Nat Turner are born. This is the year Denmark Vesey buys his freedom. We'll catch up with those three further upstream. Right now we're going to get on a ship that is carrying another anti-fascist hero. His name is simply Gabriel. Sometimes he is given the surname Prosser, but historians say that is not accurate. That is the name of his enslaver, and Gabriel's family name is lost to history. Gabriel was born in 1776, a year that will forever be associated with the ideas of freedom and liberty, but those ideas applied to very few of the people living in the newly born USA at the time, and they did not apply to Gabriel. That all men are created equal, said the Declaration of Independence, written in the year of Gabriel's birth. He would cite this document as reason for his rebellion 24 years later. When captured, Gabriel refused to give an accounting or a confession. We do not have his words in his own story. Instead, we offer you this accounting of what happened on that day freedom collided with a fated thunderstorm in these excerpts from a recent history in the Washington Post.
Gabriel was an artisan, skilled in smithing and carpentry. He could read and write. No likeness of Gabriel has survived, but contemporary newspapers described him as an arresting and physically imposing young man. His years at the forge made him muscular, and he stood about 6 feet 3 inches tall, with a long and bony face, well made, and dark knotty hair cut short. He was missing his 2 front teeth, and his head bore several scars, according to descriptions of him in circulars seeking his capture. A writer in the Richmond, Virginia Argus said he looked to be a fellow of courage and intellect above his rank in life. On a Sunday in July 1800, Gabriel approached a group of black men, most of them slave field hands, who were gathered at a bridge over a brook north of Richmond. At this popular spot, slaves congregated on their day off from labor to hear outdoor preaching, hold barbecues, fish, gamble, and drink. It was a casual outing that will be recounted months later in compelling detail to attentive white justices. Gabriel turned the slave gathering to serious business, revealing a scheme he had pursued since the spring. He had a plan for their liberty, he told the slaves, and he asked those who would join him to stand. Gabriel's recruiters moved along the enlistees, helping him make their marks on a sheet of paper. Gabriel's plan already extended far beyond this spot into 11 Virginia counties, reaching far north of Richmond, south to Norfolk, and west of Charlottesville. Estimates by those in Gabriel's circles put the conspiracy's strength at several hundred slaves. We have as much right to fight for our liberty as any men, Jack Bowler, one of Gabriel's recruits, told another slave, who later testified against Bowler at his trial. At first, Gabriel and his confidants spread word of the euphemistically termed business among several other skilled male slaves who could travel. They bought their listeners drinks, appealed to their masculinity, and employed the natural rights rhetoric of the day. Here are our hands and hearts, two early recruits promised Gabriel and his men, little knowing that those words later would be recited to seal their fate at trial. We will wade to our knees in blood sooner than fail in the attempt. Gabriel planned to buy a piece of silk for a flag on which he would write "Death or Liberty," a menacing version of Patrick Henry's famous declaration. Demonstrating an appreciation for the class consciousness politics of his day, Gabriel told his recruits that some anti-slavery Quakers, Methodists, French nationals, poor whites would be spared. He believed that some would join his fight. Through the summer, Gabriel and his inner circle made numerous trips to Richmond, taking their message to dock workers, patrons of back alley taverns, and the boatmen who poled flat-bottomed bateaux around the James Rocky Falls. Another task that Gabriel and his men pursued was to coax the keys to the capital from the doorkeeper, an old man of mixed parentage who remained noncommittal as to whether he would aid their flight. Meanwhile, at Brookfield Plantation, field slaves brought their wheat harvesting scythes to the Prosser blacksmith shop, where Gabriel and his older brother Solomon cut the long curved blades in half and sharpened and fitted each piece with a handle to produce short, heavy swords. Saturday, August 30th was selected since white patrols were scarce and the weather was still warm. Recruiters were dispatched throughout the region to spread the word, and the scythe swords were distributed for the business to begin. On the evening of August 30th, James Thompson Callender, a controversial political writer and scandal monger, looked out the window of his Richmond jail cell, where he was serving time for violating the sedition laws with a published diatribe against President John Adams and the Federalist Party. There came on the most terrible thunder, accompanied with an enormous rain, that I ever witnessed in this state, he wrote later. This was not the lightning strike Gabriel had planned, but more than the weather was conspiring against his rebellion. That day, two slaves at Meadow Farm near Prosser's Brookfield Plantation told their master what they had been hearing of the insurrection, apparently out of fear of what would happen if whites and blacks clashed. The planner raced out into the storm to alert white neighbors to patrol the countryside on horseback. The riders found nothing except violent weather, with bridges and roads washed out by torrential rains. Gabriel, deterred by the weather, postponed his attack and sent words to his followers to meet the next night on Prosser's property. They would never get the chance. After receiving repeated efforts from alarmed whites outside Richmond, Governor Monroe abandoned his initial skepticism that slaves would take up arms and began alerting units of the state militia to protect Richmond and the main state arsenal upstream on the James River. Meanwhile, white patrols began rounding up suspected conspirators. Gabriel escaped capture for nearly a month, but even while in hiding, he was not entirely silent. On September 20th, one of his recruiters composed a note, later recovered by white officials, that seemed to promise a communique. It read in part, "I's is afraid, so all you in Gloucester County must keep still, yet Brother X will come and preach a sermon to you soon, and then you may know more about the business." 3 days later, the schooner Mary sailed down the mouth of the James River and tied up at the Norfolk wharves. A black crewman disembarked and told white officials that the schooner's captain, a white man and anti-slavery convert to Methodism, had taken on a large black man on board his ship 9 days earlier. The sheriff and constable raced for the ship, where Gabriel was found below deck and was arrested. He was sent back upriver to Richmond on September 24th in chains and under guard. During this arrest, he manifested the greatest firmness of composure, showing not the least disposition to equivocate or screen himself from justice, reported the Norfolk Herald.
Does anyone know the name Gabriel Prosser? My conscience says he's the one that history missed. A blacksmith by trade up at Brookfield Plantation, a Henrico County slave born to owner Thomas. If you listen closely, you'll hear the words perfect. The Caribbean uprising caught fire in this land. Up and down the James River, Pamunkey and Appomattox, tobacco soil gone bad afforded movement for the blacks. 9 years before, down in Santo Domingo, slaves refused to submit and took the right of all man. Virginia whites got nervous and armed more militias as blacks inspired, plotted, and passed on their plans. Mr. Prosser's Gabriel was smart as he was strong, a head of keloid scars and a mind of knowing right and wrong. Voted general at 24 in the year of 1800, haunted by the hymns and wailing of his fellow slaves. Now does anyone know the name Gabriel Prosser? My conscience says he's the one that history missed. A blacksmith by trade up at Brookfield Plantation, a Henrico County slave born to owner Thomas. It was on an August night outside of Richmond, Virginia. Gabriel's men gathered as their owners they slept. Some would burn city streets to attract residents and masters, while others took the capital and freed convicts. With the whites they knew nothing, never seen what could hit them. Nothing like this could happen with their carefree black men. But think about freedom, now think about slavery. Blacks armed themselves with muskets and homemade bayonets. With a white flag on the Capitol, all blacks they would rise. Whites spared would all lose an arm. You're a coward if you own men for profit and greed. You're the coward of all, and for all you must bleed. Now does anyone know the name Gabriel Prosser? My conscience says he's the one that history missed. A blacksmith by trade up at Brookfield Plantation, a Henrico County slave born to owner Thomas. Pharaoh and Tom ratted out Gabriel Prosser. Their owner was Mosby, a neighbor of him. They say the sky seen seas of rain and lightning. On a night of August 30th, one could see nor stand. The militias let loose to hunt Gabriel Prosser, who took to the swamps as they imprisoned his men. Flagged a boat whose captain was a Methodist preacher, but a traitor slave turned him in the end. They hung Gabriel down at Broad and 15th Street. Lord, he would not give a word up on his men. But he took that news and he took it with honor. He's buried beneath parked cars now in pavement. There's no monument, there's no stone here to see him. Just black asphalt flanked by high-rise hospital chains. If I had it my way, we'd see memorials climbing to a true and honest hero, Prosser's Gabriel. Now does anyone know the name Gabriel Prosser? My conscience says he's the one that history missed. A blacksmith by trade up at Brookfield Plantation. An Henrico County slave born to owner Thomas.
At that same turn of the river where Gabriel, but for a thunderstorm, would have led an army of enslaved rebels on Richmond, another enslaved anti-fascist bought his freedom near the banks of the Ashley River in Charleston, South Carolina. Denmark Vesey was an enslaved and literate carpenter who won a lottery and purchased his freedom and opened up his own carpentry shop at the age of 32. This was in the same year that Nat Turner and John Brown would be born. Denmark Vesey became an early member and minister of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. There, he used his position as class leader to plan the revolt. He acquired property and became prosperous, but could not purchase the freedom of his wife and children. His church was shut down twice by white authorities. Denmark Vesey began to speak out against the abuse and exploitation. He vowed never to rest until his people were free. In 1822, Vesey and other leaders from the African church began plotting rebellion. His chief lieutenant was an East African priest named Gullah Jack, who led conspirators in prayer and rituals and gave them amulets to protect them in battle. Vesey's theology of liberation, combined with Gullah Jack's African mysticism, inspired potential participants, and the word of the rebellion grew. Vesey set the date for the revolt on July 14th, and men from Charleston and surrounding plantations planned to seize Charleston's arsenals and guardhouses, to kill the governor, set fire to the city, and kill every white man they saw. But in June, several nervous slaves leaked the plot to their masters, and Charleston authorities began arresting leaders. Vesey was captured on June 22nd. He and the conspirators were brought to trial. Despite torture and the threat of execution, the men refused to give up their followers. Vesey himself did not take the stand, and from jail he urged the other defendants to die like men and say nothing. In the end, Judge Lionel Kennedy pronounced him guilty and sentenced him to death. It is difficult to imagine what infatuation could have prompted you to attempt an enterprise so wild and visionary, Kennedy remarked. On July 2nd, Denmark Vesey and 5 other men were hanged. Gullah Jack was executed several days later, with the total number of executions reaching 35 by August 9th.
We do not have surviving words from Denmark Vesey. However, we know that he was a preacher and that he preached freedom. Often attributed to him are the words to one of the most well-known freedom songs of all time. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell all pharaohs to let my people go. So Moses went to Egypt land, let my people go. He made all the pharaohs understand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell all pharaohs to let my people go. Thus spoke the Lord, but Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborns dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell all pharaohs to let my people go. Tell all pharaohs, let my people go.
Now when Israel was in Egypt land,
Let my people go.
oppressed so hard they could not stand.
Let my people go.
So the Lord said, go down,
Go down,
Moses,
Moses,
way down in Egypt land. Tell old pharaohs to let my people go.
let my people go.
There were two men, two anti-fascist warriors, born in that year when Denmark Vesey bought his freedom and Gabriel led a rebellion. One was black and enslaved, one was white and the son of an abolitionist. Both would commit their lives to and would die for freedom. Walk with us now over the bridge that stretches across the Nottoway River in Jerusalem, Virginia. This was a bridge Nat Turner had planned to cross as he led yet another rebellion against that particularly American fascist institution, slavery. It is on the other side of this bridge where Nat Turner's rebellion will end, but only with his death. Nat Turner, like Denmark Vesey before him, and John Brown, who would come after him, was a deeply religious man. He was literate, a preacher, and led the only sustained uprising of enslaved people in U.S. history. As a small child, Turner could describe things that happened before he was even born. Some said he surely would be a prophet. His mother and grandmother told him that he was intended for some great purpose. In February 1831, Turner took a solar eclipse to be the sign that it was time to rise up. Over the following months, he began to gather a group of 40 to 50 slaves who secured arms and horses. On August 21, 1831, Turner and his supporters began a revolt against white slave owners with the killing of his owners, the Travis family. Most sources say that about 55 white men, women, and children died during Turner's rebellion. Initially, Turner had planned to reach the county seat of Jerusalem and take over the armory there, but he and his men were foiled in this plan. They faced off against a group of armed white men at a plantation near Jerusalem, and the conflict soon dissolved into chaos. Turner himself fled into the woods. Turner was eventually captured on August 30th, 1831. He pleaded not guilty, believing his rebellion was the work of God. He was sentenced to death by hanging, and this sentence was carried out on November 11th, 1831. The rebellion put an end to the white Southern myth that slaves were either content or too servile to mount an armed revolt. In Southampton County, Black people came to measure time from Old Nat's War. For many years in Black churches throughout the country, the name Jerusalem referred not only to the Bible, but also to the place where Nat Turner died. Nat Turner gave a lengthy statement about his rebellion before he was executed. Let's hear a bit of what he had to say.
As I was praying one day at my plow, the Spirit spoke to me, saying, "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you." That Spirit that spoke to the prophets in former days, and I was greatly astonished. For 2 years, prayed continually whether my duty would permit. And then again, I had the same revelation which fully confirmed me in the impression that I was ordained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. Several years rolled around in which many events occurred to strengthen me in this, my belief. At this time, I reverted in my mind to the remarks made of me in my childhood and the things that had been shown me. And as it had been said of me in my childhood by those by whom I had been taught to pray, both white and black, and in whom I had the greatest confidence, that I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of any use to anyone as a slave. Now, finding I had arrived to the man's estate and was a slave, and these revelations are being made known to me, I began to direct my attention to this great object, to fulfill the purpose for which by this time I felt assured I was attending.
In 1831, a slave named Nat Turner saw a vision in the sun that he took as a sign from God to start a revolution and set his people free. Over 3 days, he started what would become the biggest rebellion in U.S. slave history. Yet his story has never been told until now.
Here I stand, a man not free, whip markers on my back, shackles on both feet, picking cotton in a stone heap, pray the Lord my soul keep, for one day he came and told me, in the year of 1831, I awoke at dawn to see his vision in the sun. It seemed that the clouds parted to reveal his tongue. He said, my son, the revolution has begun, and with that, I knew the message was clear. Kill the oppressor who kept us in prison for years, raped our women and laughed in our tears, made us build their land while they sat back in their chairs. Late night, I plot with my peers, we built weapons, no guns, we must slice them from neck to the ears with spears, so they can hear the pain of a people who are God's creation, not theirs. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner. Through the darkness, we march like hellions. They call it a massacre, I call it a rebellion. We move quickly, with no time to spare. Bloodlust leave no life to spare, women and children either. After we freed our brothers, we burned down the house to ensure no survivors. On horseback we rode, blood dripping from the hooves, head out till dawn, position in the woods, then we attack again, ravaged them, then blades slashed against the master's plastic skin. The murder was so passionate, screaming to the heavens, we will never ever go back again. Word began to spread of the violent mob that brought forth the wicked into the sight of God. This is where the demise begins. It was written my tale would only succumb to a violent end. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner. After 2 days of non-stop action, we rested in the back roads of Virginia, guided by the night crescent. It was here that I began to write my confessions, for I knew it was only a matter of time till they catch us. A house nigga got scared, ran to the county building, told him our whereabouts, then they beat him till they killed him. In the still of night, I saw the flames from the distance, attacked us while we slept, but this time the difference. We fought back, but the slaves told me the revolution will only stop if they caught Nat. So again on horseback I rode, they gave the chase, caught her with me, eventually had to face fate. They hung me, skinned me, kept my head as a souvenir, beat slaves to death cause they were consumed with fear that the uprising of blacks would happen and attack further because of the name Nat Turner. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner. I'm the one that they don't teach you in class about. I'm the one who ran up in the master's house, put a knife to his neck and then gagged his mouth, charged him for black murder. I'm Nat Turner.
Come with us now to the low country of South Carolina, where the Salkehatchie and Little Salkehatchie rivers come together to become the Cohambie River. Do you see her there? That tiny little woman, barely 5 feet tall? Warrior, leader, guerrilla fighter, and military commander. John Brown called her General Tubman. In the war that is coming, she will be a soldier, a spy, and the first woman to lead an armed military operation in the United States on this very river.
I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was only one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive.
Had it not been for illness, Harriet Tubman might not have lived to lead the 150 men aboard the John Adams or along the Combahee River that night of June 1st, 1863. That expedition would rescue refugees fleeing enslavement and destroy Confederate property. All the while, Harriet Tubman would guide the ship around known torpedoes. Fleeing slaves were waiting, and Confederate property could be destroyed, all while leading the steamers away from known torpedoes. Once the signal was given that the refugees could board the ship, Harriet Tubman remembered later seeing the former enslaved running everywhere, with women carrying babies, crying children, squealing pigs, chickens, and pots of rice. Confederates tried chasing down the refugees, firing their guns on them. Black troops in rowboats transported the refugees to the ships, but chaos ensued. Harriet Tubman went on deck and sang a popular song from the abolitionist movement to calm the more than 700 refugees who would make it to the gunboats. Troops disembarked near Fields Point, torching plantations, fields, mills, warehouse, and mansions.
I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger.
But for an illness, or Harriet Tubman would likely have died with John Brown at the Harper's Ferry Arsenal. John Brown first met General Tubman in Canada. The diminutive general helped John Brown plan his raid, recruited supporters, shared her contacts and information on escape routes in the region.
He done more and died than 100 men would in living.
Another great freedom fighter for the enslaved and newly freed after the Civil War, and for the rights of women, narrowly missed the hangman's noose after John Brown's raid. In late January 1858, John Brown arrived at Frederick Douglass's home in Rochester, New York, and stayed for a month. Brown composed his provisional constitution for the state of Virginia there in an upstairs room. In early fall 1859, as Brown made final preparations for his raid, Douglass paid him a visit in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. They met secretly in an old stone quarry. Douglass brought along a fugitive slave named Shields Green. They sat down on large rocks and discussed Brown's plans. John Brown begged Douglass to join him. Douglass said no, telling John Brown he was going into a perfect steel trap, and then once in, he would not get out alive. Shields Green did say yes, and he would die at Harper's Ferry. Among the documents seized from Brown in the wake of his arrest was a letter from Douglass written in 1857. Douglass was in Philadelphia lecturing as news came of the raid, and he hastily took the train home to Rochester. If caught and sent to Virginia, this black abolitionist who had spent 20 years in slavery assumed he would be killed. In the dark of night on October 22nd, with a warrant out for his arrest and federal marshals soon to arrive in his upstate New York home, Douglass took a ferry across to Lake Ontario. Anxious and without options, he sailed for England in early November, on an electric trip he had already planned, but not under these circumstances. Let us hear a bit of what Douglass said when he spoke of John Brown years later on May 30th, 1881, in a lecture at Storer College, a black college in Harper's Ferry.
On the night of the 16th of October, 1859, there appeared near the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers a party of 19 men, 14 white and 5 colored. They were not only armed themselves, but had brought with them a large supply of arms for each person as might join them. On the night of the 16th of October, 1859, there appeared near the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers a party of 19 men, 14 white and 5 colored. They were not only armed themselves, but had brought with them a large supply of arms for such persons as might join them. These men invaded Harper's Ferry, disarmed the watchmen, took possession of the arsenal, rifle factory, armory, and other government property at that place, arrested and made prisoners nearly all the prominent citizens of the neighborhood, collected about 50 slaves, put bayonets into the hands of such as were able and willing to fight for their liberty, killed 3 men, proclaimed general emancipation, held the ground for more than 30 hours, was subsequently overpowered and nearly all killed, wounded, or captured by a body of United States troops under command of Colonel Robert E. Lee, since famous as the rebel General Lee. 3 out of the 19 invaders were captured whilst fighting, and one of these was Captain John Brown, the man who originated, planned, and commanded the expedition. To the broad vision of a true philosophy, nothing in this world stands alone. Everything is a necessary part of everything else. The margin of chance is narrowed by every extension of reason and knowledge, and nothing comes unbidden to the feast of human experience. The universe of which we are a part is continually proving itself a stupendous whole, a system of law and order, eternal and perfect. Every seed bears fruit after its kind, and nothing is reaped which was not sowed. The distance between seed time and harvest in the moral world may not be quite so well defined or as clearly intelligible as in the physical, but there is a seed time and there is a harvest time, and through ages may intervene, and neither he who plowed or he who sowed may reap in person. Yet the harvest nevertheless will surely come, and as in the physical world there are truly plants, so it may be in the moral world, and their fruitage is as certain in the one as in the other. The bloody harvest of Harper's Ferry was ripened by the heat and moisture of merciless bondage of more than 200 years. That startling cry of alarm on the banks of the Potomac was but the answering back of the avenging angel to the midnight invasion of Christian slave traders on the sleeping hamlets of Africa. The history of the American slave trade furnishes many illustrations far more cruel and bloody. Your interests, like mine, are in the all-commanding figure of the story, and to him I consecrate the hour. His zeal in the cause of my race was far greater than mine, as it was as the burning sun to my taper light. Mine was bounded by time. It stretched away to the boundless shores of eternity. I could live for the slave, but he could die for them. The crown of martyrdom is high, far beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. And yet happily no special greatness or superior moral excellence is necessary to discern and in some measure appreciate a truly great soul. Cold, calculating, and unspiritual as most of us are, we are not wholly insensible to real greatness. And above the millions, free from all the conventional fetters, true to his own moral conviction, a law unto himself, ready to suffer misconstruction, ignoring torture and death, for what he believes to be right, we are compelled to do him homage. In the stately shadow and the sublime presence of such a soul, I find myself standing tonight. And how to do it with reverence, how to do it justice, how to honor the dead with due regard to the living has been a matter of most anxious solicitude.
Like Douglas, there were others who supported John Brown's cause, but who did not die with him at Harper's Ferry. They too, like Douglas, would be forced to flee as word of their support became public. The Secret Committee of Six were a group of white abolitionist men who provided financing for Brown's raid. Thomas Wentworth Higginson was a Unitarian minister who would go on to fight in the Civil War and for the rights of freed African Americans and women after the war. Higginson was the sole member of the Six to stay in the United States and to publicly proclaim his support for Brown. He even developed a plan to have Brown rescued from his jail cell, but Brown did not want any part of it. Higginson had words for his fellow committee members who absconded to Canada to avoid arrest.
Can your clear moral sense justify our holding our tongues in order to save ourselves from the reprobation of society, even as that nobler man whom we did provoke to enter into danger becomes the scapegoat of that reprobation, going for us even to the gallows?
Theodore Parker was an American transcendentalist and reforming minister of the Unitarian Church. He was in Italy at the time of the raid, a guest of Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. He had tuberculosis, and it was believed a warm climate might offer a cure. He would die in Italy. 10 years before his death, he spoke at the New England Anti-Slavery Convention.
There is what I call the American idea. I so name it. because it seems to me to lie at the basis of all our truly original, distinctive, and American institutions. It is itself a complex idea composed of three subordinate and more simple ideas, namely, the idea that all men have unalienable rights, that in respect thereof, all men are created equal, and that the government is to be established and sustained for the purpose of giving every man an opportunity for the enjoyment and development of all these unalienable rights. This idea demands as the proximate organization thereof a democracy, that is, a government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. Of course, a government after the principles of eternal justice, the unchanging law of God, for shortness sake. I will call it the idea of freedom.
Franklin Benjamin Sanborn was a journalist, abolitionist, and author, and an early social scientist. On the night of April 3, 1860, 5 federal marshals arrived at Frank Sanborn's home in Concord, Massachusetts, handcuffed him, and attempted to wrestle him into a coach and take him to Washington to answer questions before the Senate in regard to his involvement with John Brown. 150 townspeople rushed to Sanborn's defense. Louisa May Alcott, abolitionist and author, wrote, "Sanborn was nearly kidnapped. Great ferment in town." Annie Whitling immortalized herself by getting into the kidnapper's carriage so that they could not put the long-legged martyr in. After this, Sanborn would also flee to Canada. Louisa May Alcott's father, though not among the Secret Six, is believed to have also financially supported Brown. This poem, written by Louisa May Alcott, was published in the Liberator newspaper on January 20th, 1860.
With a rose that bloomed on the day of John Brown's martyrdom. In the long silence of the night, nature's benignant power woke aspirations for the light within the folded flower. Its presence and the gracious day made summer in the room, while woman's eyes dropped tender dew on the little rose in bloom. Then blossomed forth a grander flower in the wilderness of wrong, untouched by slavery's bitter frost, a soul devout and strong. God watched that century plant up rose far shining through the gloom, filling a nation with the breath of a noble life in bloom. A life so powerful in its truth and nature so complete, it conquered ruler, judge, and priest and held them at its feet. Grim death seemed proud to a soul so beautifully given, and the gallows only proved to him a stepping stone to heaven. Each cheerful word, each valiant act, so simple, so sublime, spoke to us through the reverent hush which sanctified that time. That moment when the brave old men went so serenely forth, with footsteps whose unfaltering tread re-echoed through the north. The sword he wielded for the right turns to a victor's palm. His memory sounds forevermore a spirit-stirring psalm. No breath of shame can touch his shield, nor ages dim its shine. Living, he made life beautiful. Dying, he made death divine. No monument of quarried stone, no eloquence of speech can grave the lessons of the land his martyrdom will teach. No eulogy like his own words with hero spirit rife. I truly serve the cause I love by yielding up my life.
The fourth of our Secret Six is Gerrit Smith. Smith was a leading American social reformer, abolitionist, politician, and philanthropist, and he was a candidate for the President of the United States in 1848, 1856, and 1860. As the law began to catch up with Committee of Six, on November 7th, Smith had himself confined to an insane asylum, denying that he had been involved in supporting John Brown. Then there was George Luther Stearns, a Massachusetts industrialist and merchant, who would go on to be a noted recruiter of black soldiers for the Union Army during the American Civil War. He would, along with the Sixth Committee member, Samuel Gridley Howe, flee to Canada. I'd like to do that part over. Okay, I'm going to start with, okay. Then there was George Luther Stearns, a Massachusetts industrialist and merchant, who would go on to be a noted recruiter of black soldiers for the Union Army during the American Civil War. He would, along with the Sixth Committee member, Samuel Gridley Howe, flee to Canada. Howe was married to Julia Ward Howe, who composed the Battle Hymn of the Republic during the American Civil War.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Christ was born across the sea, with the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on.
And now, here we are, where the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers flow into each other at Harper's Ferry in Jefferson County, West Virginia. John Brown had first gained national attention when he led small groups of volunteers during the Bleeding Kansas crisis of 1856. He was dissatisfied with the pacifism of the organized abolitionist movement, saying,
"These men are all talk. What we need is action. Action!"
In May 1856, Brown and his men killed 5 supporters of slavery in the Pottawatomie Massacre in response to the sacking of Lawrence by pro-slavery forces. Brown then commanded anti-slavery forces at the Battle of Blackjack II and the Battle of Osawatomie. Brown raided plantations, liberated enslaved people, took enslavers captive, and looted horses and wagons. The governor of Missouri announced a reward of about $85,000 in today's money for his capture. Over the course of the next few months, he traveled again through Ohio, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts to drum up more support. On May 9th, he delivered a lecture in Concord, Massachusetts that Amos Bronson Alcott, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau attended. In June, he paid his last visit to his family in North Elba before departing for Harper's Ferry. As fall arrived in West Virginia, John Brown had 21 fighting men. 16 were white and 5 were black. They ranged in age from 21 to 49. 3 of them were his sons. He had received 200 Beecher's Bibles, breech-loading .52 caliber Sharps rifles, and pikes from Northern abolitionist societies in preparation for the raid. The armory was a large complex of buildings that contained 100,000 muskets and rifles, which Brown planned to seize and use to arm local slaves. They would then head south, drawing off more and more slaves from plantations and fighting only in self-defense. As Frederick Douglass and Brown's family testified, his strategy was essentially to deplete Virginia of its slaves, causing the institutions to collapse in one county after another until the movement spread into the South, wreaking havoc on the economic viability of pro-slavery states.
Take me down the Shenandoah to the joining of the streams. Take me back to Harper's Ferry. Let me revel in my dreams, where the beauty of the mountains and the struggle to be free flow into one mighty river to the sea of history. Deep in the chestnut forest, far beyond our memory, 'twas the spirits of the people who lived in harmony with the rivers and the woodlands, took only what they'd need From abundant game they hunted, gathering berries, nuts, and seeds. Take me down the Shenandoah to the joining of the streams. Take me back to Harper's Ferry, let me revel in my dreams. Where the beauty of the mountains and the struggle to be free flow into one mighty river to the sea of history. When the settlers built this little town, they came to name it for Mr.
Harper's Ferry was sleeping on that Sunday night of October 16, 1859. 19 heavily armed men made their way through the misty bluffs at the river's confluences. As the men stepped off the railway bridge into town, Brown dispatched groups to seize the musket factory, rifle works, arsenal, and adjacent brick fire engine house. 2 men remained to guard weapons that were to be distributed to slaves who joined.
I want to free all the Negroes in this state.
This is what John Brown told one of his first hostages, a night watchman.
If the citizens interfere with me, I must only burn the town and have blood.
Guards were posted at the bridges, telegraph lines were cut, the railroad station seized. It was there that the raid's first casualty occurred, when a porter, a free black man named Hayward Shepherd, challenged Brown's men and was shot dead in the dark. Brown then sent a detachment to seize several local slave owners, including Colonel Lewis W. Washington, the great-grandnephew of the first president. Jefferson's guards from nearby Charlestown seized the railway bridge, killing the first of Brown's men, a Dangerfield newbie. Newbie had gone north in a failed attempt to earn enough money to buy freedom for his wife and children. In his pocket was a letter from his wife.
It is said, Master's in want of money. I know not what time he may sell me, and then all my bright hopes of the future are blasted. For there's been one bright hope to cheer me in all my troubles, and that is to be with you.
Armed units poured in from Maryland and Virginia. Brown and his men were surrounded. Brown and a dozen of his men held out in the engine house behind its oak front doors. Others holed up in the musket factory and rifle works. William Thompson was sent out bearing a white flag to propose a ceasefire. Instead, Thompson was captured. Watson Brown and Aaron Stevens emerged under a white flag, but the militiamen shot them. Watson managed to crawl back to the engine house. Stevens, shot 4 times, was arrested. When the militia stormed the rifle works, the 3 men inside made for Shenandoah River. John Kagi and Lewis Leary were shot dead in the water. John Copeland reached a rock in the middle of the river where he threw down his gun and surrendered. William Lehman slipped out of the engine house, hoping to make contact with the 2 men Brown had left to guard the weapons. Lehman plunged into the Potomac and swam for his life. Trapped on an islet, he was shot dead as he tried to surrender. Throughout the afternoon, bystanders took pot shots at his body. Through loopholes, small openings through which guns could be fired, that they had drilled in the engine house's thick doors, Brown's men tried to pick off their attackers without much success. One of their shots, however, killed the town's mayor, Fontaine Beckham, enraging the local citizenry. A vengeful mob pushed its way into the Galt House, where William Thompson was being held prisoner. They dragged him onto the railroad trestle, shot him in the head as he begged for his life, and tossed him over the railing into the Potomac.
President James Buchanan dispatched a company of Marines from Washington under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee. Himself a slave owner, Lee had only disdain for the abolitionist. In the pre-dawn darkness, Lee's aide, Lieutenant Jeb Stewart, boldly approached the engine house carrying a white flag. He was met at the door by Brown, who asked that he and his men be allowed to retreat across the river to Maryland, where they would free their hostages. The lieutenant stepped aside and with his hand gave a prearranged signal to attack. It was over in less than 3 minutes. Of the 19 men who strode into Harper's Ferry less than 36 hours before, 5 now were prisoners. 10 had been killed or fatally injured. 4 townspeople had also died. More than a dozen militiamen were wounded.
Brown's 3 sons, Oliver and Watson, were dead. Owen, 34, was the only one of Brown's sons to survive the raid.
Osborne Perry Anderson, 29, was a free African American who was living in Canada when recruited for the raid. He survived and escaped by returning to Canada on foot. He went on to write a memoir of the raid and serve in the Union Army before dying of tuberculosis in 1872.
Jeremiah Anderson, 26, was mortally wounded by a Marine's bayonet during the final assault on the engine house.
John E. Cook, 30, the effort's chief quartermaster, had moved to the area well in advance of the raid, teaching school and even marrying a local woman. Out of the area gathering supplies during the raid itself, he reunited with the survivors as they made their way north. Captured in Pennsylvania, he was executed in Charlestown on December 16th.
John Anthony Copeland Jr., 25, a free African American who had been a student at Oberlin College in Ohio, but joined the raiders along with his uncle Lewis Leary, captured during the raid. He was executed on December 16th.
Edwin Coppock, 24, shot and killed Harper's Ferry Mayor Fontaine Beckham during the raid. He was executed at Charlestown on December 16th.
Barclay Coppock, 20, unlike his elder brother, escaped the raid and went on to become a lieutenant in the 3rd Kansas Infantry. He died on September 3, 1861, of injuries sustained when his transport train fell into the Platte River off a bridge sabotaged by Confederates.
Shields Green, approximately 23, was an escaped slave from South Carolina, recruited by Frederick Douglass. He was captured in the engine house and executed on December 16.
Albert Hazlett, 22, held the Armory building itself during the raid, escaping across the Potomac as the situation worsened. He was captured at Carlisle, Pennsylvania on October 22nd, tried and executed at Charlestown on March 16, 1860.
John Henry Kagi, 24, Brown's second in command, was stationed in the U.S. Rifle Factory during the raid. Realizing he was hopelessly outnumbered, Kagi attempted to escape across the Shenandoah River, but was shot and killed.
Lewis Leary, 24, a free African American, was stationed in the rifle factory with Kagi and also shot while trying to escape across the Shenandoah. He died 10 hours later.
William Lehman, 20, a veteran of Brown's efforts in Kansas, was killed attempting to escape across the Potomac River.
Francis Jackson Merriam, 21, blind in one eye, served as one of 3 members of Brown's rear guard stationed in Maryland. He escaped the raid and went on to serve as a captain in the 3rd South Carolina Colored Infantry, dying in November 1865.
Dangerfield Newby, approximately 35, was born into slavery despite having a white father who was not his master. With the permission of his owner, he moved to Ohio along with his mother and siblings. But when he tried to also buy the freedom of his wife and children, the owner refused, leading Newby to join Brown. He was the first raider killed, and his family was sold downriver to Louisiana.
Aaron Stevens, approximately 26, was wounded while carrying a flag of truce and carried to a nearby hotel. Tried and convicted, he was hanged on March 16, 1860.
Stuart Taylor, 22, born a Canadian, was killed defending the engine house. First buried in Harper's Ferry, he was later moved to a grave near John Brown in North Elba, New York.
Dolphin Thompson, 21, one of 2 brothers killed in the raid, died of a bayonet wound as the Marines stormed the engine house.
William Thompson, 26, was captured when he and others emerged carrying a flag of truce. After Mayor Fontaine Beckham was killed, the mob shot Thompson in the head and tossed his body in the Shenandoah to use for target practice.
Charles Plummer Tidd, 25, returned to Maryland for more supplies after the raid commenced, escaping along with the rest of the rear guard. He went on to enlist in the 21st Massachusetts Infantry, but died of fever in February 1862.
John Brown was tried, convicted, and executed on December 2, 1859, in Charlestown, Virginia. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "He will make the gallows holy as the cross." These were John Brown's words to the court 1 month before his execution.
Had I interfered in the manner which I admit has been fairly proved, for I admire the truthfulness and candor of the greater portion of witnesses who have testified in this case. Had I so interfered in behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or in behalf of any of their friends, either father, mother, brother, sister, wife, or children, or any of that class, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, it would have been all right, and every man in this court would have deemed it an act worthy of reward rather than punishment. This court acknowledges, as I suppose, the validity of the law of God. I see a book kissed here, which I suppose to be the Bible, or at least the New Testament. That teaches me that all things whatsoever I would that men should do to me, I should do even so to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in bonds as bound with them. I endeavored to act up to that instruction. I say I am yet too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons. I believe that to have interfered as I have done, as I have always freely admitted that I have done in behalf of his despised poor, was not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit. So let it be done.
Owen Brown was an abolitionist. John was Owen's son. He grew up in New England. He was born in Torrington. John Brown was a tanner and a man of many skills. He stood up for the workers who toiled in the mills. He stood up for the Indians. He stood up for the women, for the oppressed and the exploited. This good man stood with them. So when Kansas was bleeding, he went and joined the fray. If the slave trade wanted Kansas, the slave trade would have to pay. Riding on the Kansas prairie with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. With 2,000 of New England's best and bravest sons, Captain Brown fought in Kansas with a Bible and a gun. When free Lawrence was on fire, lighting up the night, the border ruffians would flee. John Brown would stand and fight. Lincoln called him a fanatic, and he was a Christian who thought you could do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. Christ said, love your neighbor, and if your neighbor's held in slavery, he was one who felt his duty was to fight to set them free. Riding on the Kansas prairie with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Drove the slave trade out of Kansas, then went to bordering Missouri. Raided the plantations, No compromise, said he. Broke the chains and shackles, rode at night to Canada. Out of this nightmare, the devil's home, America. He was caught in Harper's Ferry, his family lying dead. They questioned him for hours as he lay there and bled. They hanged him on the gallows, they laid him in his grave. John Brown was a Christian, and he died to free the slave. Riding on the Kansas prairie, with a fine and loyal band. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand. Glory, hallelujah. Beecher's Bible in his hand.
We hope you enjoyed this production, and we would like to invite you to be a part of the Anti-Fascist Unity Coalition and our future efforts. You may find out more via our website, daysofunity.org, where we are currently trying to raise money for food banks and pantries across the country, as well as our Facebook page. We would also like to let everyone know that next May 9th, in addition to John Brown's birthday, we will also be observing the 100th birthday of martyred anti-Nazi Sophie Scholl. As details emerge, we will let you know what is happening that day. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.